And you got your handout string ready to go. On in just a moment, folks. Hello, welcome to Tips, Tools, and Techniques. If you're watching at 1 o'clock on a Saturday the 24th and you're watching me live, and I love comments and questions, let us know where you're coming from. That's the best part about this. And if you're not watching live, just enjoy. My actual emails on the bottom of the handouts, which we're going to give you the link for the handout in just a moment. If you got here from an email, there's links for the handout, my favorites page, which I'm going to tell the place where you can purchase all the things I'm going to talk about, and a link, and a discount code, which is TTT15. We're going to put it up there in a second. So all the above is on the email. If you didn't come here from email, welcome. Make sure you get on the store's email list or my email list so you can get your notification. And by the way, we usually almost always do this on the 4th Saturday of every month, unless it's summertime and I'm away, or it is maybe December because it's too close to Christmas, that kind of thing. Anyway, glad you're here. A couple little, actually one announcement before we get started on the content, talking about this beautiful quilt behind me is we've got our All Florida Shop Hop coming up in just about a month, March 1st to the end of April. If you've ever done a shop hop before, you know that if you hit all 67 shops in Florida, there's some grand prizes. If you just hit the shops that are in regions, there are some prizes. And of course, every shop that every store that you shop at has sales, discounts, and so forth. We've actually got all the fabric that is associated with this shop hop on pre-order. So you can find the link probably on our front page of sewing.net is our website. And you can find the fabric if you want to pre-order it. This magazine is $13.95, plus it has 5 patterns, as you can see. So I love just getting this magazine just because it's beautiful, and there's lots of beautiful quilts in here, and there's great ads, full color ads. So anyway, and then in the center, somebody asked this morning, what is a shop hop? Okay, then. So if you hit all of these shops, everybody will put a stamp every time you stop at a shop. It'll like this. Every time you stop someplace, they will put their sticker on it. And if you fill this with stickers, then they know that that you're going to win the prize. To be honest, I don't know how you put in for the prize, but I'm sure it's in the magazine. Gabriella, do you have any idea? Gabriella's here doing tech with us today. Anyway, the rules are all here, so I'm not going to put you on the spot. Because submitting your completed shop hop, let's see. Looks like you've got to put it in an envelope and mail it. Wow, old-timey there. Anyway, it's a great time. Lots and lots of people do it. Thousands of people do this. I know when I'm working in the shop and people are coming in constantly to getting their stickers. So it's a very popular thing to do. All Florida Shop Hop starts March 1st. Hello from all of those. Hi, Naomi. My sister in Spartanburg is watching. And West Virginia is waiting for the snow. Good luck with that. Wow. I was listening this morning about how, what to do when your power is off for 2 weeks. Apparently the last time this kind of storm happened, some people didn't get power for 2 weeks. So God bless, and hopefully it all works out. Okay, so without further ado, and by the way, I don't think I've said it, I love questions, so please ask lots of questions. We're going to talk about this quilt. I literally picked up the fabric and the patterns for this quilt 2 weeks ago, and I have been working pretty much nonstop on it. I have a lot of things to say about it. It is mostly all the triangles and stars are foundation pieced, and we're going to talk a lot about foundation paper piecing today. And by the way, that is different from English paper piecing. Foundation paper piecing, you work with foundations, and let's do the overhead for just a second. So here's one of the many foundations, and we're going to sew through the paper. English paper piecing, let's go back. English paper piecing is when you wrap your fabric around a shape and then you sew shapes together. So completely different. So let's talk about this quilt. First of all, the first thing I wanted to say is the colors of this. I made a quilt, I think 6 or 7 years ago, maybe longer, the pattern is called Norway. We no longer have this pattern, so don't look at the pattern, just look at the colors. And I loved this colorway so much. Can't even lift the whole thing up, it's huge. Gabriella, tell me when to put it down. I don't know if you're scanning or whatever. Okay, so I love these colors so much, I decided to keep a box of these colors. And every time I find a color that kind of works with this set, I throw it in the box. I call it my Norway box because the pattern was called Norway. This is the 4th quilt I've made with those colors. So my tip here is if you find a pile of colors that you just love that speaks to your soul, hang on to them. Just keep adding to the pile and make other quilts with that pile. Fortunately, this quilt was a lot of little scraps. So with my box, I found all the little bits and I used up a lot of those. You don't have to do that, of course. You can use brand new fabric. But the point here is that I used a colorway that I knew was successful, that I loved. In no particular order, since we're scanning it, I'm going to talk. Where are you? Down here. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the quilting of this quilt. I literally bought the backing fabric, picked it up on Monday night, basted this quilt on Tuesday, went down to Fort Myers for 2.5 days, come back Thursday afternoon and quilted it. I knew I was going to need a fast and easy pattern since I didn't have a lot of time. So this is what I came up with. I have this shape, and you could certainly find it, create your own shape. Would find the center of this and marked it, and I'll talk about how to mark it in a minute. And then I used a serpentine stitch on my domestic sewing machine. So Gabriella, let's do a full size thing. So I would, let's pretend this camera doesn't go all the way up to the top. So let me just pretend this is the top. I would mark this one with my marker, and this one, and this one, and this one all the way. And then this is so cool. I would start my walking foot with a serpentine stitch, and I'd go there and there and there and there and all the way down to the edge. And then I come back up and do the other side, or whatever side I was on. I do the other side. And then I take this off my machine, put it back on my cutting table, and then mark another set there and there and there and there and there and there. Put it back on my machine. Sew this line, and then sew that line, and so forth. So it hits all the spots. I also forgot to say that before I did any of that, I stitched in the ditch. So I started at the top, again with my walking foot, and this time I used Invisifil thread, which is a size 100 thread. It's probably the thinnest thread out there, I'm pretty sure. And so when you get into that ditch, you can't even see it. You'd get up close and you'd have a hard time finding that thread. But if I stitched in the ditch on all these block lines, plus what I did, that's enough quilting. I mean, you could absolutely do more if you wanted to, but again, I was in a time crunch, so I was looking for something fast, something gender neutral, because somebody kept saying, well, just put flowers there, which I would have loved to have done, but the colors are kind of gender neutral, and I wanted to keep it that way. So this to me was a good way to go. It was fast, it was easy, and it was gender neutral. So I also wanted to talk about how I marked these lines. Just as an aside, one nice lady came in today with her show and tell, and she showed this beautiful quilt that she had marked it with a Frixion pen. And I was trying not to have a heart attack because we were standing in front of everybody. I'm like, please don't use a Frixion pen on the front of your quilt. The marking will come back eventually. If not with cold, then just with time. A Frixion pen was never meant to be used in the sewing industry. And actually we love it. But you have to know that you cannot mark the front of the quilt, the top of the quilt, the front of the fabric, because the line could very, very well come back. I took a class 2 weeks ago here with a national instructor, and she said about Frixon pens, don't even keep them. Don't even have them in your house. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't go that far. They have their place, but please don't mark the front of your quilt. So in this case, because I wasn't going to have time to wash my quilt, I used a Hera marker. So I'm going to put it up against my chest here. It's a very sharp piece of plastic. So you can see how pointy and sharp it is. And let's see if we can come over here. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see what I'm doing here, but it creates a crease. There it is. Boy, that comes up great. It creates a crease on your quilt. So I'm just going to move this over a little bit. So I marked it like this, and look at that. There's the mark. And you know, if I weather that a little bit, it'll go away. And if you look really closely, you probably see some of my marks that are still here, but that's okay. You know, the quilt's going to get scrunched, and that mark, that fold, that line is going to go away. So it's just a piece of hard plastic. That's all it is. So love my Hera marker. And on my favorites page is this Hera marker. It's very similar. It's kind of the same thing, but this one has a Hera marker at the top and then a point turner on the bottom. So it's a 2-for-1 from Clover. I love everything that Clover sells. So that's on my favorites page if you are so inclined. If you don't have a Hera marker and or point turner, do yourself a favor and have that in your scrap pile. So we have a question. Would you please repeat the invisible thread? Yes. So there's a difference between invisible thread like monopoly or sulky, and just as another aside, there's lots of invisible threads out there that look like fishing line. The only two that are made with polyester are Superior Threads, monopoly, and sulky, invisible thread. Everyone else out there makes it out of nylon. Nylon will yellow as it ages. It melts under a hot iron. And worst of all, it will wear grooves in your tension discs. So for those 3 important reasons, you do not want to buy any other invisible thread except Superior and Sulky. We carry the first one, the Superior Threads monopoly, in a clear and a smoke. Okay, but what I just used here was not invisible thread. It was Invisifil, F-I-L thread from Wonderfil. If you scroll down on my favorites page, I believe it's a few pages down, but you'll eventually get to it because I talk about it a lot. It's size 100, which is very, very, very fine. It might be the finest thread they sell out there. And when you can just leave the camera there, but when you got your gloves on your hands and you pull the quilt top, you're going through all 3 layers, you're stitching in the ditch. If you pull this away, you can get in there nice and tight with your Invisifil, and when you let go and the fabric kind of mushes back together, you won't see the stitch. So when people are wanting to buy Invisifil, I recommend 3 colors: a white, a black, and this very light taupe, kind of a light brown tan. And I call it a shadow color because if your quilt has lots of color and you want to stitch in the ditch, that taupe will look like a shadow and you won't even be able to see it. So thank you for asking. Now, hopefully that answered your question. Ask me lots of questions. I love them. And I think we have another question here. So I'm going to pause for just a second while Gabriella shows me a sign. Would you use for regular quilting? So would I use Invisifil for regular quilting? Not usually, because I'm confident enough in my quilting that I want my thread to show. Not that it's not going to show, but it's you're going to see stitches, but you won't see the color so much. So I keep my Invisifil for 2 reasons: for stitching in the ditch and for going around, sometimes machine applique, going around the edges of that, unless I want it to show, and then I would use something thicker. And again, it's very thin, so it barely shows. So hopefully that answered all your good questions. Donna, let me know if that made sense. Okay, so where were we? Oh, so I think I said everything I wanted to say about the quilting on this. So now I want to talk about foundation paper piecing. When I asked this morning how many people had, probably about a half to a third of the people said they had foundation paper piece. This is not like every single thing you need to know about paper piecing. I will be teaching an FPP class in the, hang on, sorry, I'd like to use it in the bobbin, monopoly in the bobbin. You know, somebody just came to me yesterday with a pack of monopoly in the bobbins, pre-filled bobbins, that she said none of her machines it worked for. So she wanted to give it to me. You do not need to put invisible thread in your bobbin. There's almost no reason for that. One of the reasons I like using a busy fabric on the back is because I could use a color thread on the back. Well, I used white in this case, but no matter what, if it's a busy back, then it doesn't show your tension issues or whatever issues you may have. So my suggestion is to just use monopoly in the top. If you've already bought the bobbins, you still put them in a spool holder and use them for the top. Use an actual regular thread in your bobbin. That's my suggestion. Okay, where was so I was talking about foundation paper piecing. So all of these triangles and stars are made with the pattern that I'm about to show you. And these stars, of course, took longer. There's a lot more pieces in that than there are in the triangles, but they were both lots and lots of fun. Gabriella, can we go all the way over here? Yeah, so people are like, why do I need a foundation piece? Or I hate foundation paper. This is a super example of why you might want to use foundation paper piecing. You've got lots of sharp points here, and that would be difficult to piece in a regular fashion with regular piecing. Some of these, you could certainly do it without foundation paper piecing, but this is a crazy quilt. Flying geese are awesome. And then, of course, this is a crazy one. So there's some ones here that would just absolutely want to use foundation paper piecing. So again, I'll be teaching it next quarter if you want to come to that class. And now let's do an overhead. And I'm going to show you these patterns that I used. So these both actually make 6-inch patterns, but let me just open it up so you can see what we're talking about. This is a pattern for a star, and you make each piece separately and then you sew them all together. This triangle, it's all one piece. That's why they look like they're different sizes, but when you sew them together, they're both 6-inch patterns. So this is all different ones, and there's 2 of each design so there's 25 designs, 50 sheets in both of these. Somebody asked today, do you make copies of this on your printer and just use that, or can you use the paper? Both. I did both. Some of the times, if I wanted to make more than 2, I would make a copy onto newsprint, which is another thing you can run through your printer, and then use the newsprint's a little bit easier to tear. But I found this paper that in the pattern fairly easy to tear, so I wouldn't worry about that. So let's talk again. This is not everything that has to do with foundation paper piecing, and these are in my favorites page, by the way, but I wanted to tell you about some tips that I remembered as I was sewing. I was like, oh yeah, I need to talk about this. First of all, you're going to use a small stitch, and the reason you use a small stitch to sew through the paper is because we are sewing through the paper. I've got one here. You can't really see my stitches, but I'm sewing through the paper, and eventually the paper goes away. You tear off the paper, and then you're left with the fabric. So my first tip is, if you're not sure about something, let me back up. The one weird thing about foundation paper piecing is your fabric goes on the plain side, and you're sewing like this. So you have to trust that your fabric here is going to work out. And so I've got a few tips about that. But so we're sewing from here, and then we're flipping it over. So my first tip is, if it's a weird shape and you're like, I'm not sure if my piece is going to work, instead of a 1.8, which I normally use for stitching, I'm going to crank the stitch all the way up to a 5.0 and base this. And then I flip it over and looks like, oh yeah, that looks great. Or, oh, I made a mistake and I need to, super easy to take those stitches out and do it again. So again, with the basting, I said 2 months ago that I hated basting, and here I am talking about basting again. Yes, quilted points do come out perfect. Okay, so once I've basted it and I like it, then I'm going to go back again and sew with a small stitch, so easier to tear the paper out. So that was the first tip, basting if you're not sure. Secondly, and this is, we'll talk about this one now. If you were to, if you were to piece just these two fabrics together and there was a little bit of purple showing, if you were to press it toward the light, then that purple, I don't know if you can see it in the screen, but I can see it in real life. There is, let me put it on white, see if you can see it better. There's some purple showing. You could see it back there. So when you're piecing, you always want to be sure that your white is either right on top or a little bit over. So, or you, of course, press to the dark side. With foundation paper piecing, my suggestion is when you lay this down, you always overcut your pieces. So I'm just going to overextend my white over my purple a little bit. So when I sew it and flip that over, I don't have to worry about the purple showing. So this one tip here is to just overextend, cut your lighter colored pieces a little bit bigger than they need to be. So you can and if you don't do that, then you'll need to flip this over and trim the purple so it doesn't peek out when you flip this over. Okay. The next, if there's any questions, let me know. The next thing is, if the piece isn't big enough, you can patch it rather than taking out the stitches. So I've got this nice little triangle here, and oh no, my piece isn't long enough. So instead of taking this off, of course I basted it'd be easy to take off. Let's say I've already sewed it very small and I don't want to take it out, then I can sew a little patch down and then fold it over, and then it fixes my problem. And I have I happen to notice I have like 4 examples of that up here. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you one. I don't know if you can see this, get up close. So even though I basted and everything, you could see this line here. That's where I had to patch this white piece because it wasn't big enough. But if I hadn't pointed that out, you would never ever see it. So that's a little patch, and there's probably 2 or 3 more that best laid plans. I still ended up patching it. And that's okay. And we do that in a class sometimes when people's fabric just isn't quite long enough to cover their section. I show them how to do a patch. I think I have one more tip for you. 2 more tips, actually. Let's see. Why can't you stitch the fabric down on the printed side of the paper? Good question. Boy, Gabriella's paying attention. If you stitched it here, then you'd have to flip over and sew. Oh, thank you. If I put the fabric on the line, then I flipped it over, I wouldn't be able to see the line. So the paper is only printed on one side. So I have to put my fabric on the non-printed side, right sides together. And then when I flip it over, I can sew on the line. So it's a little tricky and it does take practice. You could certainly watch other YouTubes and they'll take you step by step. There's lots of books out there. Carol Doak is one of the big names in foundation paper piecing, and you can buy one of her books, and she's always got all the instructions at the front. So, and we have some of her books as well. So that's just the way it's done. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. 2 more things. If I were to sew, okay, we've got a big triangle here, and my triangle that I brought isn't quite big enough, but let's just pretend. So I sewed this down and it looks like this, but this piece is just flappy. This last piece, this corner is flappy. So what I've taken to doing is, by the way, this solid line is the finished size of the block, and the dotted line is where you're going to cut. That's your seam allowance. So I sew, let me find something to point with. I sew a slanted line between these 2 corners, and that nails down this little flappy piece for me. And that way, when I go to sew this to the next piece, I don't have a piece that's flapped over. Back in the day, I used to sew with a basting stitch all the way around, like inside that line, but then I had to take all the stitching out, or it's hard to get all the paper off. So now I just hit those little corners, only the corners that are flappy. You know, this was actually not flappy because it's the first one I sewed down, and there may be some, well, I didn't glue this one, but normally I'll glue the first piece with a little bit of glue stick, and so it's not going to flap. So usually the last few pieces that are flappy. Okay, final tip. Somebody explained this. I had never heard this before, but I like it a lot. She said, for every sewing line, crease your paper first. You know what? I'm going to do this one because it's smaller. So here's a sewing line. So I'm just going to crease the paper. And what you're doing is you're distressing the fabric, the paper ahead of time. And then that makes it easier to tear when you go to sew. So all I'm doing is creasing. I'm not doing anything else. You know, I'm not cutting or anything like that. So you just crease it. And then when you go to sew this piece, it'll be that much easier to tear all the paper out. And here's a good tip for tearing the paper out that I don't hear very often. So let's say this is covered with fabric. I'm all done. I'm ready to go. I've trimmed it out. Now I have to flip it over and take off all this paper. And man, sometimes that's a pain. But if you take this block and it's covered with fabric and you snap it a few times, the fabric is fine, but the paper is distressed, and the paper will now start coming apart at the seams. And then it's just easy to just, you know, just pick up the paper and go. It's practically popped off all by itself. So you gotta snap it pretty hard to get the paper to tear. So, do you recommend folding on the line before placing the fabric? Yes. So that idea was, I first pick up my paper. I haven't done anything to it, and I'm going to fold on the line all the lines, and then I'm going to start attaching paper to it. The very first paper, I look for number 1, very first fabric, and I will usually glue stick just a tiny little dot of glue to hold that down. The reason I like glue sticks is that they hold immediately. I don't have to wait 5 or 10 or 20 minutes for the glue to dry out. The glue stick works automatically. So I keep a glue stick by my machine, and I use it a lot. And then Donna says she also creases all her lines first. She finds it helpful. So I'm excited to try that tip. I've never heard that tip, and I've been teaching and doing foundation paper piecing for a long time. So I'm excited about learning something new as well. Any other questions? I love to hear them. So yes, the points come out perfect. So like I said, when you've got really, really sharp points, that's when it's very handy to have, to be able to point. There we go. There's a nice sharp point right there. It's hard to see because of the colors, but yeah, it's really nice to be able to have that come out perfectly every time. So any other good questions, let me know. And we're going to move on, I think. Oh, I forgot to talk about this little guy. So this is an iron, believe it or not. I got two irons here. This is a back in the day when you were putting wallpaper on. It's a wallpaper iron. But what I use it for at home is it stays by my sewing machine. And as I'm building my thing, if this was just straight and I sewed it like this, but I want to get it nice and flat before I put my next piece on. So that irons it for me. And then the other idea is sometimes you can get these, you know, I should have put it in my favorites page. Alex Anderson has a four-part tool, 4-function tool that's wood, and one of the things is an iron. So I would use this. And to be honest, this one lives in my teaching bag here at the store, so I don't get to see it very often. But this is the one I use, and it works great as well. So if you don't have either one of these, highly recommend getting one off my favorites page. So there's that. Now I think I've said everything until I think of something else. Any questions? You know, I love good questions. So we're going to put that on here. And I'm ready to talk about the next quilt. So this comes down. Love this backing so much. I wish I could tell you that we have some left, but I think I got the end of it, but it sure is cute. Okay. Before I talk about this quilt, I have a couple things. I want to talk about borders. In our little advertisement email, we talked about what do you do when a pieced border does not fit, right? I've got 2 quilts here. I'm just going to talk about the borders. This is a quilt that a friend of mine made, and I'm doing some of the quilting on it for her. And so the border is pieced. It's flying geese, or yeah, I don't know. I guess we call that flying geese. Anyway, triangles. But let's say for some reason you lay your border down and you go to pin it and it doesn't quite fit. So here's my tip for you. Go back and open up just a couple seams, like every third one or every fourth one. You're going to take apart this seam and open it up just a little bit. And you're not going to do it for just like 5 in a row. You're going to skip 3 or 4, do again, skip 3 or 4, do it again, and so forth. And then, you know, do it carefully, keep measuring until you get to that, till you get that one that's perfect. Look at my quilting. Isn't that good? That is those feathers. I'm kind of proud of those feathers. Still got to clip a bunch of threads. So yes, so if your pieced border is too big, then you're going to, you know, tighten up make those seams just a little bit bigger, like every third or fourth or fifth one, and keep measuring to make sure you haven't gone too far. And then this second quilt is kind of the same idea, but I thought I'd bring it because I haven't shown this quilt. My daughter got married in May, and so I made her a signature quilt. So we took all these squares to the wedding, and all her friends and family signed the squares, and I made a quilt out of it. I was going to give it to, I gave it to her for Christmas, and at the very last minute, I figured out this border, which I'm pretty happy about. But again, with the same idea, this border is simply a solid border, a pieced border, and a solid border, right? And I wanted to make sure my corners came out perfectly, and so I had to make sure maybe it was a little too big or a little too small. Actually, I don't even remember, but I just, you know, kept playing with these seam allowances until I could get the perfect fit. So that's all I wanted to say about that. So there it is. There's the quilt. So now she gets it back. Oh, and then, so I used a brand of pens called Fabric Co. And then there's still room for people to sign. And so I put a little pocket here on the back bottom. There it is. There's a pocket for the pens. So she's got 3 pens that are still left. I started with 5 and 2 of them disappeared, but there's a little pocket on the bottom of the quilt. So that's where the pens go. So when she hangs this quilt on the wall, she can just reach back there and get a pen, and they can sign it. So signature quilt, you'd want to, of course, use freezer paper on the back of all your fabrics while people are signing, and then you peel that off later. But freezer paper, you can iron it to the back of your fabric, make it like more like paper to sign on. Okay, now we're going to talk about this quilt. I forgot to say handout. There is a one-page handout. Gabrielle is going to put the link up on the screen or in the comments, and you could click on it to get to this handout. I would recommend you either print it or bring it up on another device, and you'll be able to follow along. So here we go. This is what I call a log cabin lean-to. It's not a full-size log cabin. It is a partial log cabin. So this is the block right here. I don't know if you could see that. That's a whole block, and so there's a whole bunch of them. So the idea is if you have, it starts, let's go to the big screen. This quilt was designed to use 10-inch squares, a layer cake. So if you've got a beautiful layer cake in your stash, or you see something here that you love, good one to use. We're going to cut this up. So if you have 40 of these, you're going to end up with 40 of these. Okay, so it's a 1-for-1. It's a pretty cool idea, if I do say so myself. And I'm going to show you how it's done. So pull out that handout. Hopefully you've got the link and you can click over to it, put it on another screen, another device, or print it out. And there's my cutting thing. So we are going to pull up the handout, and it says start on the left side. You're going to cut a 2-inch by 10-inch strip off the stack. And I should have ironed this beforehand, but we'll just pretend it's ironed. And again, Love my Quilter Select ruler. This handle is not to necessarily hold the fabric down. It is just allows me to quickly pick up my ruler and put it down because I have no fingernails and it's hard to do otherwise. So this is just makes it a little more efficient for me. Okay, so I'm going to cut a 2-inch piece. So there we go, 2-inch piece. And then I'm going to turn the pile counterclockwise a 1/4 of a turn. And by the way, you can either turn, well, 2 things. I would usually pile this up into 3, 4, 5, however many pieces of fabric you feel comfortable with cutting. And if it's a big pile, you may want to consider using a smaller mat and moving the mat instead of the pile, because the pile might come apart, and then you'll spend half your time trying to get everything stacked back up again. So there we cut, and then we turn it clockwise another 1/4 of a turn. And then we keep cutting. So we just keep going round and round and round. And this is just such a great design for any kind of layer cake. It doesn't have to be, plaid. It doesn't have to be anything. It just, everything goes, as long as everything goes together. You could probably just use yardage, but you want to use lots of scrappy yardage. So you notice I just keep turning and turning and cutting and turning. And then once you do that, get them all, one more cut. All right, here we go. Now, once you got all that, you're going to sew them back together. And I just happen to have a cute little one here that has lots of colors on it. So we're going to use that instead, but it's the same cuts. So there's the big one. And then we start building our half log cabin, or I guess it's a 1/4 log cabin. And I'm actually building it backwards. So you would sew these 2 pieces together and then sew that, and then sew that, and then sew that, and so. Oops, did I get this? Yep, got it backwards. Anyway, you get the idea. So when you finish doing that, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. So that's in the picture on the handout. It's actually probably the one that I took the picture of. Well, no, it's another one. Anyway, so there it is. So then, of course, you're going to want to trim it down using a smaller ruler. And, you're going to trim it down, hopefully all the blocks to the same size. And so then you end up with that puppy. How cool is that? So yes, there's a little bit of waste, but it is a really fun way to use up a 10-inch layer cake. So hopefully that made sense. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you, Sandra. Yes, she loves the signature quilt. I gave it to him for Christmas, and it was a big hit. So glad to do that. Yeah, highly recommend making signature quilts for people. People love to put sign little things. And then I took it to a family reunion this summer, and more people signed that couldn't come to the wedding. So it was a wonderful thing. I had this other idea I gave to my son, who got married in November of a year and a half ago. And when I told her I got some for her too, she said, no, I don't want that. So I said, how about a quilt? So what I gave him was, you could buy these really big Jenga blocks, wooden Jenga blocks, for the game. And we put them out with Sharpies, and everybody signed one. And then they have this Jenga game they could play with their friends. And she's like, Mom, I don't need more stuff. I need less stuff. So, okay, how about a quilt for your wall? Okay. So that's how that ended up. So any other good questions, let me know. So that's the one handout for today, but I've got some other stuff to talk about, so don't go anywhere. So yeah, if you don't have a small mat, sometimes it's nice just to be able to spin it around. Of course, a rotating mat would be nice too. You can also, of course, use the other side. So if this gets all chewed up, you can, of course, use the other side. So we got a question. Could you use a stash of 2-inch strips? Of course you could. Remember, this is not 2.5. I guess this would work with 2.5. You'd have to redo the numbers. But if you had 2.5 strips, of course, 2-inch strips, of course that would work. Yes. Good question. So let me take this down, tell you about one more. This seems to be a quilt heavy session today. I try to usually throw in projects and other kind of sewing, but for some reason it's mostly quilting today. This is a quilt that I made a few years ago called Kaleidoscope. And it is a little, one of those little Villanova patterns, $2. Everybody can afford $2. And it just makes, you know, I'm looking at hers. I feel like theirs is upside down. I don't know. Does the butterfly, shouldn't the bigger part be on the bottom of a butterfly? And on this quilt, the bigger part is on the top of the butterfly. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know butterflies. I put my bigger parts on the bottom of the butterfly. We're gonna Google that. Anyway, the reason I love this pattern, they are kind of on the top, aren't they? How come I have never noticed that until this very moment? Well, that's embarrassing. Okay, so the reason I love this pattern is this is basically an orange rectangle with 3 snowball corners taken out of it, right? And then this is a smaller, probably a square with 3 snowball corners taken out of it. So then you mix and match your colors. You put in, this is basically sashing, right? This butterfly center is basically just sashing, as is this blue here. So it's a very simple quilt to make. Let's talk about the quilting for just a second. Anytime I quilt a fish, a bird, a butterfly, anything that flies or swims, I end up using usually this design. Walking foot, lengthen your stitch a little bit, and it's just a freehand line. The lines can cross or they cannot cross. You get to decide what you want to do with it, but super simple. And let's back it up a little bit. And so one of my tips for quilting that kind of design, don't start at the top, tiny, 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 all the way down. Instead, like maybe every 6 inches. So I'm going to quilt this line and then maybe quilt this line, you know, every few inch, wherever it seems to make sense. Then I'm going to go back and split that in half. So if I quilted here, maybe I'm going to put a line there, and I'm going to cut that in half again and cut it in half again. And that way, if you get sick of quilting it, you don't have to finish it because you started so skinny, and it keeps everything kind of in order. You don't have too much quilting in one place and not enough in another. So distribute it every 6 inches, then every 3 inches, then every 1.5 inches, and so forth until it gets to the density that you want it to be. Hopefully that makes sense. So I just go left to right, cut my thread, left to right, cut my thread, and just do like that. So wow, I made this wrong all this time. I guess there's a sleeve up here. So I guess I could move the sleeve and then no one would ever know. So that is a Villanova pattern. It's on my favorites page, and it is called Kaleidoscope. And that's the other weird thing. It's a butterfly quilt. Not sure why it's called Kaleidoscope, but that's what it's called. Okay. I have checked my cheat sheet, but I think I have 3 more things to talk to you about. I forgot to talk about one of them this morning with everybody. I promised that I would talk about if you have a quilt that you have made and maybe you've washed and dried it and it got too small, or maybe you wanted to gift it to somebody and they said, oh, it's not quite big enough. I'm going to show you how to add a border to a finished quilt. Okay. So let's say this was a finished quilt. It's not really. This is a sample I use in my machine quilting class for various reasons. I have various talking points. But, well, let me back up. So when you have a finished quilt, it's got binding and everything, and you've decided, oh, it needs a bigger border. I literally just slice off the binding, right? And then decide how big I want my border to be. So here we go. Let's do an overhead, Gabriella. I'm going to take a piece of border for the backing and a piece of border for the front. It just happens to be the same color. It doesn't have to be. And then, of course, batting the same size as well. So here's, I hope you can catch this. This is my front piece. There's my batting, and there's my back piece. So I have trimmed the edge of my quilt to 1/4 inch, and I'm going to use my walking foot. I'm going to sew all those layers down. Looks like I've already graded the batting, graded this seam, which means you've taken out some of your excess so it doesn't get so thick there. So you can grade out some of that extra batting. And then when you open this up, there's your border. So I imagine you could do this on the top and then on the bottom of the quilt and then the two sides. And I've done this like 3 times and it's worked great every time. That's all it is. And then it's very easy to quilt, Free-Motion quilt a border because it's on the edge of the quilt. You're not dealing with, trying to get to the center of your quilt. So that's how you can add a border to a finished quilt. And then of course, got to rebind it. Let me know if you have questions on that. I also wanted to talk about quilting from the edge of the quilt as opposed to quilting from the center of the quilt. Let me see. Okay, this would be a good example. Should have left it up there. So when our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers were quilting, they would always start quilting a quilt, probably by hand on a frame, from the center and work their way out. And there was a good reason for that. It was not usually well basted, it was thread basted. And so maybe the layers of the quilt might come undone a little bit. And so they didn't want to have any bubbles that they couldn't resolve, any wrinkles in the center. So they would work in the center and just try to make sure everything is flat as they work their way out. All good reasons. But we don't do that anymore because our quilts are going to be much better basted, either spray based or pin based. In some way, we're going to be basting our quilts better. So there's not going to be any shifting, and really you could start anywhere. So what I like to do is I like to start quilting on the borders or edge of my quilt all the way around. I know, crazy. And then clip off the excess batting and backing and then quilt the center of the quilt. Here's why. Number one, it's easier to quilt the edge of the quilt. So if I haven't quilted in a few days or weeks or months, it's easier to get back into it if I'm not fighting to get to the center of the quilt. Number two, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but the backing sometimes flips over and you're just sewing along. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, my backing has flipped over and I have to take all those stitches out. But if you quilt the edges of the quilt first, you can really be paying attention. Is my batting and my backing flipped out all the way around as I'm sewing the edges before and then I could trim off all the excess. And then I trim it off I trim it off and then I finish. And the reason I trim it off is because that batting sometimes makes a mess, or it might get flipped over still. So I just go ahead and trim it all off once I don't need it. And I need it at the beginning because I need kind of a place to hold my quilt as I'm quilting the very edge. It's nice to have a handle. But once you finish quilting the edge, you don't need that. You could just trim off the excess. Hopefully that made sense. Give it a try if you have not already. Let me know what you think. But yeah, even an all over design, I still quilt the edges first and then cut off the excess. So another tip there for you. Maybe that's a technique. I don't know. Finally, one last thing. We were going to talk about seam rippers. And there's a lot of seam rippers out there. And the very first thing I should say is most likely the seam ripper you're using probably needs to be changed out. We think they're going to last forever and they don't. They're like little knives and you can't really sharpen them. So eventually you're going to need to replace your seam ripper. So let's do an overhead. These two are my absolute favorite. Clover makes both of them. This one has a slight lead because I feel like it has a slightly finer tip and can get into smaller stitches than this one, but I like them both. One big reason I like them both is they don't roll off my table. I had a couple round ones, like the ones that come with your sewing machine. They literally falling off your table all the time, hitting you in the ankle. Yeah, and I never felt like they worked very well anyway. Although one person said today that the one that came with her machine was super sharp, but most of the time I feel like they're substandard. So these are my two favorites. If you've ever taken a class with me, you know that I wear this as soon as the class starts. Somebody gave this to me and it's like my favorite thing to teach a class with. So it's got the cap. She drilled a hole in the top, and then this is probably my second or third lanyard because they get gross after a while. But this is a way to be able to carry your seam ripper around without hurting yourself. And then at home, I just keep these under my little sewing table thing that I can grab as I go. So anyway, consider changing your seam ripper, just like consider changing your blade a little more often than you thought you should, because they do go dull. And then I call it new blade nirvana. When you finally get a new blade, you're like, oh, why didn't I do this sooner? So treat yourself to a new blade, treat yourself to a new seam ripper, and try one of those. You won't be, you'll appreciate the change. You won't be, what's the word I'm trying to say? I can't even say it. I think my brain is dead. Question, I only use the brown seam ripper. My quilt teacher recommended and I love it. Yes. Well, this quilt teacher is also recommending it. Thanks for letting me know. I think that is everything I wanted to tell you guys. Thank you so much for joining me. And again, I'll be back in February on the 4th Saturday, so you can join me again. Or if you're in town, you can join me at 10 o'clock face-to-face and see all the wonderful show and tells. How do you change your machine needle? How often do you change your machine needle? I used to tell students, change them after you finished every project. And one person said, oh, I never finish projects. So, so now I say 6 to 8 hours. I also, I love the titanium needles, but then it's like how long before it's hard to know when to change a needle unless it really sounds funny or something, or if you're having thread issues. A lot of times it's the needle. We can go on and on about needles. So I just get the regular chrome needles because I know to change them every 6 or 8 hours of sewing. If your machine is starting to sound weird, they're kind of like the tires. They're the thing that hits the road that does all the work. So you need to buy your needles in bulk and switch them out probably a little more often than you think you should, or than you do. So hopefully that answered it. Microtex, yes, the needle that I use the most is a Sharp Microtex size 80 for piecing and Sharp Microtex size 90 for quilting. I have dozens and dozens of those ready to go. I do use other needles on occasion. I use size 100 for making bags and so forth and so on, but 80 for piecing, 90 for quilting, all Microtex. They're nice and sharp and they'll make a nice straight line. So thanks for saying that. I think that's everything. I appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.